All right, well, thank you again, Nada, for convening us and for working so hard to get this set up. I regret that it was such a stressful beginning for you, but please have no worries. I think we're all just happy to be here, or at least I am. Since you just framed our panel topic as a question of why does it still matter to talk about identity at the present moment, I'm going to say I presuppose the answer to be yes in my talk here, but I hope that in showing the particular take on it that I hope to show, it will also be clear why identity status remains such an imperiled category for many different identities and many different types of bodies. So I hope that even in presupposing an answer to the question, I will nevertheless be justifying my presupposition at least a little bit. So, does anybody know what this is? Does anybody remember these?
I do.
You do? What are they? Tell me what this is, please, if you would. This is my audience participation moment to create buy-in.
It's probably any girl's dream, I would say.
Oh.
To obtain maybe, or have one of these, and also to imitate, be, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I did not grow up with these. This is definitely not my dream when I was a girl, because I didn't see any Barbie until I came to the United States.
Okay, fair enough. And well, so much the better from my perspective. This is a product that was released to much fanfare, fuss, and bother by the toy company Mattel in 2019, which also makes the famous Barbie and Ken dolls, which have done so much to overdetermine, prescribe, entrench prescriptive notions of the male and female ideal, at least in US culture, and I fear very broadly as well. So in 2019, Mattel did something that was really trumpeted quite a bit as this revolutionary thing. You can tell by my tone that I don't see it that way. These are the gender-neutral dolls that they released in 2019. And you can see that the idea is that it's, I guess it has one body that comes in different skin tones, and you can change its clothing and its hair to make it more feminine or more masculine. So-called, and my scare quotes here are to the point. So it's a step in the right direction in many ways. I think it would have been great if, I had one of these when I was a kid. I always preferred to play with stuffed animals rather than toys of humans because I could not see myself represented in either, dolls that were supposed to be female or supposed to be male, because I was and always have been this, non-binary person. So, nevertheless, when these things first hit the market in 2019, well-meaning cisgender friends of mine, that is people who are, whose identity aligns with the gender that was assigned to them at birth as male or female, cis male or cis female, many well-intended cis friends of mine got in touch to say, congratulations, you've been accepted, you're being celebrated, you're being represented, you and other non-binary people you've hit the mainstream, you've been discovered. And as much as I appreciate the good intention of those sentiments, I find some implicit assumptions there, and also this product itself really quite disturbing. And I'm going to talk about why. So one serious problem with these dolls is the way that they maintain these very strict forms of exclusivity, even while making this big pretense of inclusivity and of progressiveness. And part of what I mean is that they admit validity to one very particular form of non-binary gender, but only that one. And the message that comes across is that they also are branded as gender-neutral dolls. Nobody in our community, we don't call ourselves gender-neutral, we call objects and bathrooms gender-neutral. We are non-binary or gender variant or transgender or gender fluid. I myself am a non-binary person. Nobody would call us, actually I have heard people refer to us as gender neutral, and it felt very dehumanizing to me. I did not like it. So that's already not great. The other thing, though, is that these enshrine one type of body, a sort of classically androgynous, thin, elven, more or less light-skinned, although clearly they're trying not to lean too hard in that direction here, which I guess is something, enshrines that kind of body as, okay, this is a acceptable form of beauty that's not classically male or female. Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate that's wonderful, And also, what about everybody else? What about trans women who have broad shoulders and thick facial hair? Or what about non-binary people who have large breasts and lots of curves? What about fat bodies? What about disabled bodies? What about intersex bodies? And so forth. Even worse to me, the most insidious thing to me is the discrepancy between the pretense of inclusivity that this toy company is striking and these companies' incredibly powerful roles in creating and entrenching, and most importantly of all, continuing to profit from, continuing to exploit the very norms of prescriptive gender that now they're pretending to very bravely and generously transcend. There's a lot of problems with ignoring the way that the commodity landscape has shaped our understandings of gender over time, and the one that I'm going to focus on today is the lie of the principle of supply and demand, the way that it's commonly understood. There's some critiques we can come back to. For most of my life, I was told, and I unfortunately believed, that the reason it was hard for me and people like me to get things that we need, appropriate clothes like these, appropriate haircuts, appropriate medical care, was just that there weren't enough of us. It wasn't personal, it's just a money thing, just bottom line, there just wasn't enough demand for these things to make it worth it for companies to provide them. There's two problems with this. First of all, there are, and there always have been, more people like me than I ever realized, and I don't just mean young people, I mean people across all ages and demographics. And it was very damaging to grow up being told, that's fine, but you're the only one. I was not the only one. We were all very cut off from each other, and there was no visible community for us, even though we've been around since the dawn of time, non-binary folks. Even worse, I'm going to say, the supply and demand explanation ignores the way that supply affects demand. And there's a sentence in the Dialectic of Enlightenment by Adorno and Horkheimer, published in 1947, which makes this point better than I ever could have in my own words. The possibilities conferred by birth are molded to fit the production of goods that can be bought on the market. And this brings me to my primary way of proceeding in this talk, which is to steal sentences from the Dialectic of Enlightenment and apply them for my own purposes. And I say stealing because Adorno and Horkheimer were not progressive gender heroes, not at all. This is not where they were trying to go with this, and yet their profound insight into commodity capitalism, their ability to articulate some very, very elusive, important to articulate things I need with quite a lot of desperation in order to express the conditions of my life that have been shaping, have been a problem. And so the main thing that I'm going to argue with their help is that if we ever want to have a conversation wherein we overturn prescriptive gender norms, we can't do that without also talking about commodity capitalism and commodity psychology. So just to reiterate, the first idea I'm borrowing from Adorno and Horkheimer the relationship between the availability of relevant, pertinent goods and services is not just a matter of convenience for gender variant folks. It is actually harder to become a non-binary or gender non-conforming person, because not just because you can't get the stuff you need, but because your needs themselves are constantly repudiated as illegitimate. So now I want to try to clarify how these forces actually influence people's behavior, which is a really important thing to be able to explain to doubting neoliberal interlocutors, of which I, for my own part, find I have very many. So one major control mechanism identified by Adorno and Horkheimer is the manipulation on a mass scale of feelings connected to morality. Quote, "The countless agencies of mass production and its culture impress standardized behavior on the individual as the only natural, decent, and rational one." So these norms of naturalness, of decency, of rationality, these are all bound up with moral standards, and these have tremendous chastening power. These standards can be used to engender disgust very easily, and disgust is one of the deadliest forms of propaganda that a society can deploy against a population. Now, of course, another very powerful social control mechanism is ostracism. And here my authors quote de Tocqueville. No, well, that's fine. "Under the private monopoly of culture, tyranny leaves the body free and sets to work directly on the soul. The ruler no longer says, 'Either you think as I do or you die.' He says, 'You are free not to think as I do. Your life, your property, all these you shall keep. But from this day on, you will be a stranger among us.'" Adorno and Horkheimer understood the power of advertising as weapons of capitalist society against the individuals it's trying to dominate. Quote, oh boy, the dominant taste derives its ideal from the advertisement, from commodified beauty. So goods on the market don't so much respond to standards of beauty as dictate standards of beauty, which was sort of my point about the traditional Barbie dolls, and also the non-traditional ones now. And one way that this power is capitalized on by companies is by enshrining the extremes of sexual dimorphism, the male and female poles, so-called, and creating a lot of profound shame and discomfort around everything that falls in between these extremes. So my authors show how ads can act as a blocking device, and how they have the ability not only to denigrate, but to outright proscribe certain identities just by insisting that they're not actually real possibilities of identity. And to me, this kind of erasure is one of the very most damaging forms of social and bodily discipline that can be leveled against gender variance. Almost even worse than saying, "Oh, you're disgusting, you're unnatural, blah, blah, blah. You don't exist, you're not here. You're not here. You're not real. You can't be that. You can't be what you are." The invisibility that results from this is somewhat paradoxically, perhaps, the awful flip side of the hypervisibility that makes non-sanctioned bodies subject to so much violence and persecution. And if it seems like it's not possible to both be erased and dangerously exposed, hypervisible, trust me, it's possible. Don't have time for that one, but I like it. We can come back to it, talk about that was from a previous iteration, would love to come back to it, but perhaps no time. So now I want to talk about why it is so hard to unseat the gender binary as a regulative, disciplinary ideal. And here I'm going to rely on 2 points from my friends Teddy and Max. The tangled mass of cliques and institutions, which ensures the indefinite continuation of the status quo, is impenetrable to each individual. Which is to say, gender culture, like other aspects of culture, isn't determined by citizens and by consumers. It's decided in closed-door marketing meetings, in boardrooms. They are these if you've ever been in, offices and where these decisions are made in marketing meetings, they're these fortress-like strongholds, and they're protected by many convoluted layers of gatekeeping, and they're completely impermeable to outsiders. And individuals, citizens, just have to suck it up and live with the results of the decisions that are made in these unreachable, these inner sancta of power. Now, some people might think, well, if you have a smart, good-hearted executive, they can help change the system from within. Not so fast. Executives, producers are themselves caught up in the gears of these same machines that they help to build and maintain. Quote, there exists the agreement, or at least the common determination of the executive powers to produce or let pass nothing which does not conform to their tables, to their concept of the consumer, or above all, to themselves. So, economically, executives might benefit from the social control mechanisms of commodity capitalism. But as individuals, they are also, like everybody else, suffering the rending, tearing effects of these mechanisms on consciousness. And so these executives are then rarely in a position to reform the systems from within, but they're in an excellent position from which to systematically reproduce their self-alienation. And this is also a reason why workplaces are such powerful forces in the transmission of prescriptive gender norms. And if we had a little more time, I could tell you some great stories about working in an office with a non-binary identity and body. So I'm going to try to bring us around to a conclusion here. What I've been trying to say, and what Adorno and Horkheimer understood, is that it can only superficially be said that demand controls supply. At the level of culture, supply controls demand, and along with it, controls people. Apologists for the culture industry will claim that the standardized forms were originally derived from the needs of the consumer, and that's why they're accepted with so little resistance, that is, by consumers, whereas in reality, a cycle of manipulation and retroactive need is unifying the system ever more tightly. To control human beings' needs is to control their identities. To create needs that did not exist previously is to forcibly mold identities. And to deny the needs that exist in reality is to preclude the identities to which those needs correspond. Quote, any need which might escape the central control is repressed by that of the individual consciousness. So here's a final question that someone might be asked. Since companies' directive is to make as much money as possible, shouldn't they always be seeking out all of the possible markets for profit? And I would say in answer, well, you have to take into the possibility that companies either stand to gain or think they stand to gain more by carefully controlling the exclusions of their brand than by serving the widest possible clientele. And I personally think that a similar principle would explain, for example, why companies have dragged their feet so much about, say, manufacturing Band-Aids that match dark skin tones. And indeed, a lot of the logic of this paper applies to aspects of social being besides gender, race, class, ability, status, you name it. And all of this explains why those Mattel dolls are the way that they are. Because the company is making one insidiously calculated show of inclusion while succeeding in tightly, carefully maintaining these profitable practices of gatekeeping and exclusion. So while it's true and a wonderful thing that gender variance is enjoying a new visibility and a new cultural prominence, if this progress is going to be more than just a limited, marginal, superficial improvement than, quote, the tangled mass of cliques and institutions which ensures the indefinite continuation of the status quo, needs to lose that protective invisibility. My goal is not to bring the gender variant community and our needs under central control. My aim is to break central control over all the possibilities of existence conferred by birth. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
There's